Hey, you're back. Welcome to Season 2 of The People We Meet. My name is Bruner, and I'll be your host. This is a show about ordinary people that have done extraordinary things. I'm glad you're here, and let's get on with it. Hello, and welcome to another episode of The People We Meet. Bad news, everybody. Today, you just get me. No guest, no expert. Every once in a while, a topic comes along that's just going to be a little you and a little me. Sometimes I have something on my mind that I just want to sit with out loud for a while. Today, I want to talk about my generation, my people. And yeah, I know how this usually goes. Anytime someone says, my generation, the internet assumes you're about to complain, brag, or yell at the clouds like they personally wronged you. But that's not what this is. This is more like a visit. And one of my guilty pleasures is reading those articles where one generation explains what it hates about another generation, what Gen Z hates about boomers, what boomers hate about everybody, what millennials think is annoying. It's like Thanksgiving dinner, but with links and less pie. I read one recently about the lessons that baby boomers learned from their predecessors, and I genuinely enjoyed it. It wasn't defensive. It wasn't smug. It was reflective, and it got me thinking. Hell, I come from a pretty interesting generation too, so I decided to write one of my own. And I'll be honest, I took no small amount of joy in doing it. Some of that joy might bleed through as I read this, but I promise I'm not here to rant, lecture, or plead my case. Mostly I started thinking about faces. My childhood friends, my classmates, guys that I was in the Marine Corps with. I think back to Saturday mornings, riding big wheels down the block after cartoons, feeling like the entire world belonged to us. I don't want to start a generational war, but I do grieve a little for the kids today who will never know the joy of a big bowl of alphabets in front of the TV watching the Bugs Bunny Roadrunner show and Scooby-Doo. You guys missed out. And I'm not saying it explains everything, but I'm also not saying that. And then the sentimental side kicks in, because those kids that I grew up with, they're middle-aged now. I see crow's feet and gray hair, stiff joints, and that expression that adults get. The one you wear even when you're laughing, because now you're a big kid with big kid problems. And some of those kids, they're not here anymore. Some we lost along the way, and I miss them. But for those that remain, they lost a little something too. Those big wheel riding, cereal devouring, cartoon watching kids have left the building, and they're not coming back. And I could be sad about them, but honestly, I'm not. What I feel is pride, because those kids became adults who carried a lot. We lived through a strange slice of history, and we packed it away as wisdom points and battle damage. And that's Generation X. You've heard the mythology by now. We drank out of the garden hose and lived. Nobody gave a shit where we were until the streetlights came on. Our parents thought we were just around the block when we were actually 10 miles away building a fort out of stolen lumber in a field with no trespassing signs everywhere. Yeah, that part's true. But there's more. A lot more. And not just bragging about all the shit we did because we had no supervision, but the things that happened afterwards that didn't exactly go as planned and brought us back down to earth. The things that make us human and on the same playing field with all the generations that we share the planet with. They call us the forgotten generation, the latchkey kids, the cynics, the ones stuck between the screaming boomers and the selfie-obsessed millennials. Boomers don't like millennials? Millennials don't like boomers? Well, guess what? There's a generation in the middle that doesn't like either one of you. Kidding. Sort of. A Generation X is the quiet middle child of history. Old enough to remember when things worked differently, and young enough to see what's not working now. Now, I'd like to think that we, being the kick-ass, no-bullshit generation that we are the ones holding all this together. But that's not the truth. The truth is, we're just kind of the ones behind the wheel right now. The world as it stands, the good, the bad, the beautiful, and the downright fucked up, That's partly on us. We built the tech, the systems, the companies, and the culture everyone's using. We took the analog world we were born into and built the digital age everyone lives in now. Some of it made life better. Some of it made things worse. And pretending otherwise doesn't make us tough. It just makes us blind. We grew up swearing we'd do it better than the generations before us. And in some ways we have, but in others we've repeated the same mistakes in new packaging. We're not saints and we're not martyrs. We're just ones in the driver's seat, trying to keep the rig on the road while the wheels shake, the gas light's been on for 20 miles, and the master caution panel's lit up like a Christmas tree. And I was born in 1969. Too young to be a boomer, too old to be a millennial. Perfectly wedged right in the middle. The year Neil Armstrong walked on the moon. The year Woodstock turned 3 days of mud, music, acid, and weed into a cultural legend. The year Hendrix bent the Star-Spangled Banner on an electric guitar and Grace Slick damn near silenced the crowd with White Rabbit. The year Nixon was in the White House and Vietnam was on every television in every living room. That was the backdrop of my birth. My childhood was the 70s. Station wagons where the seatbelt was your mom throwing an arm across your chest like she was an airbag, Evel Knievel lunchboxes, and a thermos that always smelled like yesterday's soup. Tonka trucks made out of real steel, Rock'em Sock'em robots, Stretch Armstrong, G.I. Joe, Weebles that wobbled but didn't fall down, which might be the most Gen X toy ever made. And when you had to write a 10-page report with a bibliography, you did your research with an encyclopedia and the Dewey Decimal System. And bikes? Freaking bikes, man. No helmet unless you were that one kid. And when you rode your bike, you better know where you were going because Google wasn't going to tell you to turn right in a quarter mile. And if you crashed your bike, you either got back on it or limped your bleeding ass to a gas station with a payphone to call for a ride. And that's about the time Atari showed up. Not gaming like today. I mean days, playing combat and air-sea battle like it was a full-time job, and Space Invaders that absolutely did not stop until you were dead. And somewhere in there, I experienced one of the greatest injustices of modern history. Every Christmas since the late 70s has been another Christmas that I did not receive the handheld Mattel electronic football game. That was some bullshit. I'm not mad. I just remember. And movies shaped us too. Jaws made us afraid of the ocean. Star Wars changed how we saw the universe. And Rocky taught us what grit looked like. Grease and Footloose became the soundtrack of every school dance, whether we liked it or not. And then 80s hit. The world lit up. MTV arrived, and suddenly music wasn't something you heard. It was something you watched. Songs had faces. Style became less about how you sang and more about what you looked like. The future felt loud and electric. And the music itself, man, I could go on about the music all day. Shit, it's playing in the background right now as I write this. Queen, Bowie, right this second. That music shaped me for my entire life. It was my constant companion in lonely houses, school dances, Van Halen blasting on the baseball practice fields, car rides, skating rinks, dates, broken hearts, and military deployments. 80s music is an essay in itself, an entire suitcase of memories. Yeah, Cyndi Lauper said that. They say smell triggers the strongest memories, but for me, it's the tunes. Play a song and ask me where it takes me, and I'll tell you. My departure from Kitty Records to the School of Rock and Roll started on a bus ride to school in the 5th grade, listening to an AM station called KFXM in Southern California. And that's where I met Springsteen, Billy Joel, the Bee Gees, Styx, the B-52s, Devo, Kenny Loggins, Dolly Parton, the Eagles, Pink Floyd, Ozzy. I mean, that little bus may as well have been a classroom. I remember dances where I fell in love with a girl named Carolyn Rice, and another one where I was dying to dance with this other girl when Faithfully finally came on, and we danced. And her armpits smelled so bad, I couldn't wait for the song to end. That's real life right there. I remember the year I went to 3 different schools for the 8th grade. Now, a lot of the time, music was the only comfortable company around. And then I hit the hair bands we now affectionately call butt rock. Motley Crue, Rat, Poison, Cinderella, an entire 2 CD collection of monster ballads. On the way to a ski trip, I once admitted to a buddy that I got pumped up listening to monster ballads. And he looked at me sideways and says, "You're a strange motherfucker." Fair enough. And Marine Corps boot camp does weird things to your brain under stress. Twice during first phase, suddenly I knew the lyric to songs beginning to end that I never would have claimed to remember. I wrote them down in my little green book and checked later. And hell if they weren't spot on. And if that's ever happened to you, drop me a line, because I think that shit's interesting. And the coolest sunrise I ever saw was aboard the USS Taro at dawn, mounting a .50 caliber machine gun to the side of a Huey. Beauty, badassery, the ocean, and the Police's Synchronicity playing on a boombox in the cabin. I can't hear a song off that album without being right back there. And it's not a bad place to be. Now, my family makes fun of my butt rock and being lost in the 80s. Hey man, that's cool. I wouldn't give that up for anything. The good times, the bad times, the lonely times, and the unforgettable ones. It's stuff like that that keeps a strange motherfucker young. But I digress. Getting back to the era of Generation X. We lived through the heat of the Cold War. We grew up under the shadow of mushroom clouds, not metaphorically, literally, as in, are the Russians going to nuke us while I'm at school? They even made a movie about it. It was called The Day After, just to show us how horrendous it would be. And Joshua from War Games taught us that in the game of global thermonuclear war, the only way to win was not to play. We watched Ronald Reagan get shot by a guy trying to impress Jodie Foster. We watched John Lennon get murdered and felt the world go quiet. And the Challenger exploded live on television. Teachers crying, kids staring, and everyone sitting there wondering what the fuck just happened. And AIDS emerged out of nowhere and taught us early that life wasn't safe, predictable, or guaranteed, and that fear can warp a whole culture. In 1983, a truck bomb tore through the Marine barracks in Beirut and killed 241 Americans in their sleep. And for us, that wasn't abstract news. That was personal. That was the moment service stopped being theoretical. We watched American hostages parade in Iran and the rescue attempt that failed in the desert, and learned the uncomfortable truth that even the strongest nation on earth could stumble. And then there were moments of triumph. There was the miracle on ice, and Mary Lou Retton, who I loved, and Eric Hayden slicing across the ice with those ridiculously huge thighs. The Olympics turned into a kind of Cold War chessboard. Boycotts, pride, propaganda, shit, even sports weren't safe from history. And that was our rhythm. Wonder and shock, joy and loss, light and shadow, all in real time. So yeah, they say we're cynical. And maybe we are. But that cynicism was earned. It wasn't weakness. It was armor. Now let's talk about that joke that we rarely sit with, the whole latchkey thing. Our parents were off chasing something. Careers, second marriages, an extended happy hour, and sometimes just about anything that kept them busy enough to not have to come home. And some of them were just trying to keep the lights on. Our parents' marriages collapsed in record numbers. And it was like a fad. And it got to the point where if your parents were still together, you were in the minority. I had a house key on a string around my neck. And that broke because I got into a fight on the playground and I replaced it with a dog tag chain and wore it around my neck like it was normal. Because it was. At least for us. I came home to an empty house and I got used to it. Is that something a kid is supposed to get used to? I don't know. I'm not here to whine. I had a roof, I had a food, and I had a home. And that's more than some people get. It was just empty. And beneath all that we're so tough mythology was something quieter. It was loneliness. We didn't call it that, and I don't think we had the words. It just was. So we filled the silence with MTV, Atari, Three's Company reruns, and cereal eaten alone. But here's the thing I love. Out of that loneliness came connection. You want to know what we did? It's crazy. We picked up the phone and called someone. We went outside and knocked on doors and said, "Hey, you coming out?" And if your friend was home, you didn't need a calendar invite. You didn't need a group chat. You didn't need to schedule it. You just went. And they weren't just friends. They were lifelines, allies, the kids that you rode bikes with, got lost with, stay out too late with. They were the noise in the silence. And maybe that's why Gen X still craves connection the way it does. Because deep down, some of us are still that kid listening to the air conditioner, waiting for the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. And when we finally had our own kids, a lot of us swore it would be different, which is probably why we overcorrected a little. It could have happened. And we were also surrounded by heroes every time we went to the movies. Not perfect ones, durable, fucked up, flawed ones. And those movies weren't just entertainment. They were instruction manuals, just not the polite, laminated kind. They were messy, human, and usually written in blood and bruises. Take Rocky. Rocky Balboa wasn't smart. He wasn't fast. He wasn't especially talented. And in Mickey's words, he fought like a goddamn ape. But what he had was heart, and more importantly, the willingness to stay in it. That line, if I can go the distance, I'll know for the first time I wasn't just another bum from the block. We felt that because it wasn't about winning. It was about proving you weren't a loser. You could take hits. You could get back up. You could keep moving even when the odds said you shouldn't bother. And that landed with us. That was Gen X in a nutshell. And then there was Sarah Connor. Now, Sarah doesn't start out as a warrior. She's not special. She's a waitress trying to make rent. And then her world ends. A machine hunts her. No one believes her. And a half-mad soldier from the future grabs her and says, "Come with me if you want to live." In one sentence, innocence is over. Sarah Connor wasn't a superhero. She was a survivor. And in her, we saw what so many Gen X women became. Underestimated, pushed too far, and forged into something fierce by necessity. She didn't want to save the world. She just refused to let it die. And then there's John McClane. And what always stuck with me about John wasn't so much that he was a badass. It's that he was human. He was a tired, blue-collar cop trying to save a marriage while the world blew up around him. He gets his ass kicked, like real bad. He bleeds, he limps, he crawls through broken glass without shoes. And he doesn't dominate the situation. He endures it. And he apologized to Holly. He taught us that being tough didn't mean being flawless. It meant owning your mistakes and staying in the fight anyway. And let's be honest, Hans Gruber wasn't some cardboard villain. He was smart, charming, competent. Real life doesn't hand you enemies you can hate cleanly. And is Die Hard a Christmas movie? You're damn right it is. It's not Christmas until Hans Gruber falls from the Nakatomi Plaza. And then there was Rambo. Rambo, once you got past his shredded physique and that air of indestructibility, he was about as broken as they came. Unresolved PTSD and a sense that he belonged nowhere and had no purpose was painfully apparent when he said, "I'm expendable." "What you mean expendable?" asked Coe, and Rambo replied, "It's like when someone invites you to a party and you don't show up. It doesn't really matter." And I remember sitting in the theater ready to take in the coolest, most badass 2 hours of commie destruction and POW redemption that I'd ever seen. And that was what hit me. And that's how a lot of those guys felt when they came home from Vietnam, and America better not ever fucking forget it. And then there's Ellen Ripley. Well, I think Ellen ended up being my favorite. Ripley was different. She wasn't bred for war or revenge. She was a warrant officer on a cargo ship just trying to do her job when the universe reminded us that out in space, no one can hear you scream. She wasn't fearless. She was terrified, and she acted anyway. And that's what made her dangerous. She followed the rules, trusted her instincts, and told them not to bring the damn thing on board. They ignored her, and we all know how that went. One by one, people died in ways that rewired our nightmares. And Ripley survived, even if the only one she managed to bring back with her was the cat. And by the time aliens rolled around, she'd already been to hell. When they dragged her back, she didn't owe anyone anything. She didn't want glory or revenge. She just wanted to go home. But when the colony went dark, something shifted. Her help was needed, and she went. Not because she was brave, but because it was right. Ripley taught us that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's what you do in spite of it. She showed us that leadership can be quiet, calm, and compassionate, even when you're covered in sweat and alien blood. And when she faced down the queen and said, "Get away from her, you bitch," every one of us in that theater said, "Oh, snap." She showed the world that strength doesn't have to come at the cost of compassion, that a woman could be nurturing and lethal, vulnerable and unstoppable, all at once. She didn't need saving. She was the savior. Ellen Ripley was one badass bitch that I would have followed any day of the week. She didn't just fight aliens. She showed generations of women and men what it looked like to be a tour de force when the universe pushed too far. She made power beautiful. She made leadership human. She made equality look inevitable and empowered women to stand up and lead. And a shout out to Corporal Hicks, who showed men that it was okay to stand beside her. And there were more, of course. These characters weren't fantasies, which is good because most of them had physiques we could never live up to. They were rehearsals. They taught us how to lose with dignity, how to keep going when nobody was clapping, and how to take responsibility when shit went south. And eventually, the screen faded, the credits rolled, and we realized something unsettling. We didn't get to just watch heroes anymore. We had to grow up and become them. Not cinematically, but in a real way. Showing up, going to work, raising kids, fixing things, holding it together when you didn't feel like it. No parade, just the job. And we also lived through the strangest technological shift in human history. Rotary phones to smartphones, 8-tracks to cassettes to CDs, and now it's just a subscription. Do you know how many CDs I have still sitting on the shelf that I just haven't had the gumption to throw away? Dial-up modems screaming like dying yaks that evolved to streaming 4K movies while scrolling through other apps. I remember my first computer. Bought it in 1995, and it came home in a giant stack of boxes. Tower, keyboard, speakers, mouse, software, monitor. And the monitor weighed as much as a small refrigerator and took up 3/4 of the desk like it paid rent. Now, the whole thing comes in a box the size of a briefcase, and if it doesn't work, you don't fix it. You restart it, and then you stare at it angrily until it updates and it works out of spite. Now, we didn't fear technology, but we didn't worship it either. We respected it. We broke it, fixed it, and made it work for us. And without realizing, we built the digital world that everyone lives in now, which means the good parts are on us. And the broken parts? Also on us. We can't talk about convenience without talking about disconnection. We can't talk about speed without talking about burnout. And we can't talk about access without talking about overload. And that's not a confession. It's just the grown-up truth. Now there's a bridge. Because Gen X is the hinge between worlds. We remember the analog world with enough clarity to respect it, and we understand the digital world well enough to function in it. We're the generation that remembers boredom and understands burnout. We're the generation that remembers being unreachable and now lives in a world where you can be reached by anyone, anytime, about anything, forever. And that puts us in a weird position. We're kind of the translators. We can talk to our parents without needing a meme to do it. And we can talk to our kids without pretending we've never heard a curse word before. And we can sit at a table with people who see the world differently and not immediately treat it like war. Or at least we can try. Which means if Gen X has a purpose right now, it's not to win the generational debate. It's to steady it. Because every generation has something to teach and something they need to learn. Boomers get clowned on constantly, and sometimes they invite it. But let's be real. The boomers fought some hard battles so that we wouldn't have to. Civil rights, voting rights, women's rights, gay rights. They pushed the country to pass laws that forced it to match its conscience and its claims. They walked in marches, stood at lunch counters, burned draft cards, and forced a nation to look in the mirror. We owe them more than jokes. And as they age, we owe them care. Not just respect on holidays, and not just the occasional, hey, thanks for your service vibe. Actual care, actual patience, and definitely dignity. And then there are the generations after us, millennials and Gen Z. We love to roll our eyes at them. It's tradition, and it's practically a hobby, and hopefully it helps to toughen them up a little bit. But they're doing some things that we were a little late to the game to. They talk about mental health without shame. They set boundaries, and they call out bullshit. They offered up the crazy-ass notion that living life isn't about working until you fucking die. They care about the planet like it's sacred and not disposable. We taught them resilience. They're teaching us empathy. We taught them how to work, and they're teaching us when to stop. And that's not weakness. And Gen X, sitting in the middle, is one of the few groups that can actually see both sides without losing our minds. We're the ones who can say, hey, I get why you feel that way, without turning it into surrender or aggression. And I'll tell you what, man, that's a rare skill right now. I read something recently about an astronaut, one of those people who's been far enough away from Earth to see it whole. No borders or politics or arguments, just a blue marble hanging in black space. He talked about how, from up there, the planet looks impossibly fragile, thin, alive in a way that feels almost temporary. And he said something that stuck with me. None of it matters. What matters is that this is the only place that we have to live, that every argument, every tribe, every label is happening on something so delicate you could almost imagine it shattering if you handled it too roughly. And from that distance, all the little stuff that we obsess over, losing our fucking minds over a 13-minute halftime show, who said what online, which side is winning the outrage cycle this week, it all disappears. Astronauts call it the overview effect. That moment when perspective rewires you, when you realize how small you are and how short your time is here and with those that you care about. And I think Gen X is old enough now to have its own version of the overview effect. We've zoomed out far enough to see patterns. We've lived long enough to watch cycles repeat. We've seen how loud everything gets when people lose perspective and how quiet it gets when something actually matters. And maybe that's our real value now. Not being the loudest voice, but being the one that remembers the bigger picture. Which brings me to a line that's followed me around for years. It's from Pulp Fiction. You remember Jules Winfield, played by Samuel L. Jackson in a black suit, quoting scripture right before he pulls the trigger. He keeps reciting Ezekiel 25:17 like it gives him some moral cover, like it turns violence into righteousness for 5 seconds, even though he just says it sounds like some cold-blooded shit to say to a motherfucker before I pop a cap in his ass. The path of the righteous man is beset on all sides by the inequities of the selfish and the tyranny of evil men. And blessed is he who in the name of charity and goodwill shepherds the weak through the valley of darkness. Now, for most of the movie, Jules believes that story about himself. He thinks he's the righteous man doing what has to be done in a dirty world. And then the miracle happens, when God came down from heaven and stopped those motherfucking bullets. The illusion cracks. And Jules has that moment of clarity where he realizes something kind of uncomfortable. That he's not the righteous man. That he's the tyranny of evil men. And that verse he's been hiding behind, it wasn't about the people he killed. It was about him. And that's when he said the line that never left me. I'm trying, Ringo. I'm trying real hard to be the shepherd. And that line hits differently when you've lived a little. Because when you're young, survival feels like enough. That's wolf energy. And Gen X, we're pretty good wolves. We learned to fend for ourselves, adapt, keep moving even when help wasn't coming. And that worked for a long time. But survival isn't leadership. Cynicism isn't wisdom. They're tools, not destination. And we're not kids anymore. We're the adults in the room now. The parents, the managers, the voters, the CEOs, and the salty old hand that knows the craft. So the question isn't, how do we survive? It's what are we protecting? And that's shepherds' work. And shepherds don't get to just snap at everything that moves. They guide, they protect, and they think long term. And if Gen X has a role now, it's not to dominate the conversation. It's to steady it and to connect what came before to what comes next, to soften the edges, to keep the family from tearing itself apart over stupid shit while the important stuff slips away. Because the future isn't waiting on us. It's counting on us. And that's my little talk for the day. Thanks for listening. Well, that'll about do it for this episode of The People We Meet. But before we wrap up, I want to give a huge shout out to my main man J-Mac over at Studio 42 Recordings. I couldn't do this without you, brother. And much love to my family for their constant support. And most of all, thank you, the listeners. This show exists because you keep showing up, and I don't take that lightly. And if you like what you hear, you can find me on Instagram and Facebook. Give the show a follow and spread the word. And if you know someone with a story that just has to be told, or if that someone is you, drop me a line at thepeoplewemeetpodcast.com. Thank you for listening, and be good to each other.